A gray sky hung over the still waters of the lake. Leela's funeral was taking place in a small cemetery. A light rain was falling. Mark stood by the freshly dug grave, holding an umbrella over himself and his wife. Catherine, his wife, stared into space, her lips pressed together. She barely cried. Her grief seemed to have turned to cold numbness. Mark approached the coffin and threw a handful of earth onto the lid, saying goodbye to his mother-in-law. Leela was like a second mother to him. He felt empty inside. The person close to him, the one who had always supported him, was gone. The priest read the last words of the prayer. A small group of relatives and friends stood at a distance. Mark noticed among them Catherine's stepfather, Richard, a tall man in a formal black coat. Richard kept to himself, his lips pursed. His eyes glistened either from tears or from the rain. When the ceremony was over, people began to leave. Mark lowered his umbrella and glanced at his wife. Catherine suddenly pulled away as they walked away from the grave. She looked at Mark as if he were a stranger. "We need to talk," she said coldly. Mark nodded, feeling the tension. They retreated under the crowns of wet fir trees, sheltering from the drizzle. Catherine crossed her arms over her chest. Her eyes were red, but not from tears, more from anger or hurt. "I know this isn't the right time," she began, looking around to make sure none of the guests were listening. "But we can't wait any longer." Mark frowned, trying to understand what she was talking about. Perhaps it was grief that was speaking to her. "What do you mean?" he asked quietly. Catherine paused, as if choosing her words. Rain dripped from the branches behind her. "After Mom died, everything changed," she finally said harshly. "We have nothing left, Mark. No love, no trust. You know that yourself." Mark didn't know. He opened his mouth to object, but Catherine raised her hand, stopping him. "Let me finish. I want you to move out of the house today." These words struck harder than an alarm bell. Mark took a step back, looking at his wife in amazement. "What? Cat, what are you talking about? Why?" "Because it's better this way," she snapped. "For both of us." Mark felt a chill run down his spine. He hadn't expected it now, on the day of the funeral. He tried to touch her shoulder, but Catherine pulled her hand away. "You're upset now. We're going through grief." He tried to calm her down. "Maybe we shouldn't make decisions in the heat of the moment." "I made up my mind," she said sharply. "Even before today. I'm sorry." There was no apology in her voice, only firmness. Mark searched her face for a hint of doubt, but found none. This was a completely different woman, cold and distant. "Is this because of me?" he asked quietly, swallowing the lump in his throat. "Did I do something wrong?" Catherine looked away. "Not now," she said. "Just pack your things and leave." Mark looked at her, not believing that this was really happening. They had been married for 7 years. Sure, things had gotten colder in recent months, but he chalked it up to her being busy or having problems. And now, on the day they buried her mother, she was demanding that he leave. He felt a flash of resentment. This morning she had barely spoken to him, kept to herself. Maybe she was accusing him of something, but what? Richard, Catherine's stepfather, came up to them, holding an umbrella. He stood next to them, looking from one to the other. "Catherine, is everything all right?" he asked quietly, but with a hint of authority. "Yes," she answered shortly. "We're leaving now." Richard nodded at Mark, his face a mask of sorrow, but his eyes an unreadable expression. Mark briefly wondered if he might have been eavesdropping on part of the conversation. "Mark," Richard said dryly, "do you need a ride to Seattle?" "Thanks, no need," Mark muttered, still trying to gather his thoughts. The stepfather shrugged his shoulders and turned to his stepdaughter. "Catherine, I'll be at the pier. Don't be late." When Richard had moved away, Catherine turned back to her husband. "I hope you understood me correctly. You should not be in the house until the evening." She turned and walked quickly down the gravel path, leaving Mark standing alone in the rain. Mark dropped his umbrella and bent down to pick it up. His hands were shaking. He didn't know what to think. He had just buried Layla, the person who was dear to him. Now it seemed he was losing his wife, too. For what? Pounded in his head. The cold rain was seeping down his collar. He walked slowly toward the parking lot, where there were almost no cars left. In the distance, he could see the pier, where the last guests were heading to get off the island. He didn't see Catherine anymore. She must have gone with her stepfather. Left alone, Mark got into his car and dropped his head onto the steering wheel. His eyes burned, either from the wind or from the tears that were welling up. The day that had begun as a tragedy had become a personal catastrophe for him. He had no idea that things would turn out this way. Mark started the engine. There was nowhere to go. The house he considered his was now close to him. "You should not be in the house until the evening," sounded in his ears. He decided that he would only return to pick up his things. Tonight he will spend the night in a hotel on the mainland. And then, what next? Divorce? Why suddenly? He glanced at Layla's grave, barely visible between the trees. What happened, Mama Layla? He thought to himself, imagining his mother-in-law's face. She would definitely not approve of such a breakup, especially in such a cold manner. Mark sighed, pulled out onto a narrow road, and headed toward the ferry. The gray landscapes of the island floated past the window. His heart sank with misunderstanding and pain. He knew one thing. Today he had lost two close people at once. A few months ago, everything had been different. Life had seemed calm. Mark remembered a summer evening on the porch of Leela's house, a house in the suburbs of Seattle, when his mother-in-law had invited him and Catherine to dinner. Mark was always happy to visit Leela. They had a surprisingly warm relationship. Sometimes it even seemed to him that Leela understood him better than his own wife. Catherine loved her mother, but there was tension between them, and Mark and his mother-in-law found a common language from their first meeting. Both were interested in history, loved long walks. He often helped Leela with the housework. They could talk for hours in the kitchen over a cup of coffee. That evening after dinner, Catherine left early, citing urgent work. Mark stayed behind to help Leela clear the table. Then the two of them sat on the porch with cups of tea. Leela looked thoughtful. She stroked her hand in a thin wool glove. Her fingers sometimes went numb from an old injury. Mark noticed the concern on her face. "Layla, is something wrong? You're quiet today," he asked softly. The mother-in-law smiled sadly. "It's okay, Mark. I don't want to burden you with my problems." "It's not hard for me to listen," he said. "You do so much for us, and for me personally." Layla nodded gratefully. She looked into the distance, where the garden was plunging into twilight. "You know, something is bothering me," she finally admitted, "and I'm afraid there's nothing I can do about it." "Tell me," Mark asked cautiously. Layla sighed. "It's about Richard." Mark tensed. Richard, Leela's second husband, was Catherine's stepfather. Mark didn't know him very well. Richard was distant. He was over 60 and had married Leela 5 years ago after a brief acquaintance. Catherine had not accepted her stepfather at first, considering him an upstart. Mark tried to be polite, but he didn't feel warm feelings for the man either. Something about his cloying politeness and cold eyes made him distrustful. "What exactly is wrong with Richard?" Mark asked, trying to sound neutral. Layla smiled sadly. "He is deceiving me." Mark frowned. "In what?" Layla didn't answer right away. It was as if she was gathering her courage before voicing her pain. "He's cheating on me." Mark was taken aback. "Are you sure?" Layla nodded, looking ahead. "Almost. I don't have any photos or anything, but I see the signs. Late calls, secrecy, occasional business trips that aren't work-related. I found Trace's restaurant receipts for 2 people, women's little things that don't belong to me." She fell silent, clenching her palms. Mark felt a flash of anger for Layla. "God, I'm so sorry. Have you talked to him?" "I tried," she nodded. "He denies everything. He says I'm making it up. But I know, a woman's intuition, as they say." Mark shook his head, unsure of what to say. Richard's betrayal outraged him. Leela didn't deserve it. "Are you thinking about divorce?" he asked quietly. Layla smiled bitterly. "At my age, divorce is the last thing I should do." And then we have financial matters that are closely intertwined. It's not all that simple. She looked Mark straight in the eyes. I know you're an honest man, so I'll tell you frankly, I've already consulted a lawyer about the will. I want to leave everything to Catherine and to you. Mark waved his hands. Wait, don't say that. It's too early for you to think about that. And what good would an inheritance do me? You have Catherine. Layla smiled sadly. Listen, I'm a realist. And I know my daughter, she's impulsive, easy to manipulate. And you're a reliable birth for her, even though you're going through a difficult time right now. Mark looked away. He remembered how Catherine had become distant lately, often staying late at work, becoming irritable, picky about trifles. He tried to talk to her, but she brushed him off, saying everything was fine. Yes, things aren't going smoothly for us, he admitted quietly, but I think it will pass. Layla looked at him carefully. Mark, I'll tell you as a mother, I think Catherine has someone. Mark looked up sharply. What? No. What makes you think that? These words burned. He didn't even allow such a thought, although small suspicions sometimes appeared because of her frequent overtimes and cooling off in bed. Layla shrugged. I just feel it. Women see things like that. She's my daughter. I notice changes. Mark drummed his fingers on his mug in excitement. His heart started beating faster. Scenes flashed through his head. Catherine with someone else? No, it was Catherine, although lately. I could be wrong, Layla said softly, placing her hand on his arm. But please, don't close your eyes. If you find out it's true, don't forgive her. Infidelity is hard to forgive. Mark was silent, shocked by his mother-in-law's revelation. He respected Layla for her frankness, but he had not expected such a conversation. Why are you telling me all this? He asked hoarsely. Layla sighed. Because it's important to me that my daughter has a decent person next to her, even if she makes a mistake herself. And you're decent. And if things don't work out with her, I still want to help you. She hesitated, then added, there are things I trust only to you. I may need your help soon. Mark looked at her carefully. Of course, Layla. You can count on me, he said sincerely. Layla smiled sadly and changed the subject. They didn't touch on the subject of infidelity again. But his mother-in-law's words sank into Mark's soul. He didn't want to believe them then. Remembering that evening now, after the funeral, Mark knew. Layla knew or suspected something. Maybe she knew for sure. Her revelations about infidelity, these were warnings both for him and for her own husband. Layla hinted at the will that was being prepared, but Mark didn't pay any attention to it at the time. You never know what old people think about such things. Shortly after that conversation, Layla actually went to her lawyer and drew up new documents. Mark didn't know this until he shook his head, clearing the memory. It had all come crashing down faster than he could have imagined. Leela had died suddenly a few months later of a heart attack, and on the same day they buried her, Catherine had destroyed their marriage by throwing him out of the house. Everything Leela had warned him about had come true, the infidelity, the betrayal. If Mark could turn back time, he would try to save both Leela and the marriage. But the past could not be changed. All that was left was to move forward and deal with what was left. After everything broke, Mark pulled up outside his and Catherine's house late that evening. It was a cozy two-story house in the Seattle suburbs that Leela had bought a couple of years ago. It was getting dark and the drizzle was still falling. He hoped Catherine had gone to bed so they could avoid another argument. He wanted to pack his things and leave, just like she had asked. The house looked empty. There were no lights in the windows. Mark opened the front door with his key. It was quiet in the hallway. He went into the living room. It was dark. Perhaps she went to a friend's or to him. A painful thought flashed through his mind. Who was Catherine with now? With that mythical someone that Leela had spoken of. He had no proof, but his heart ached with suspicion. Mark went upstairs to the bedroom, and suddenly he froze in the doorway. Suitcases. 2 suitcases lay on the marital bed. Catherine stood next to them, throwing armfuls of clothes into the open suitcase. She turned around sharply when he appeared. Only the bedside lamp was on in the bedroom, its light catching sharp shadows on his wife's face. She was pale, her eyes were red, but not from tears, but rather from stress. "What are you doing here?" she asked tensely. Mark raised his hands, trying to speak calmly. "I came for my things as you asked. You said so yourself." He stopped short, his gaze falling on the suitcases. They weren't his things. He recognized Catherine's dress, her shoes. Was she going to leave too? "Are you going somewhere?" he asked, tensing up. Catherine gritted her teeth as she continued to zip up her suitcase. "It's none of your business." Mark felt anger and resentment boiling inside him. "Wait, I think it's my business, since you're throwing me out of our house without an explanation." "What's going on, Catherine? You owe me at least an explanation." She slammed the suitcase shut. "I don't owe you anything. It's over between us, Mark. Accept it." "But why?" His voice broke. "We've been together for 7 years. Damn it. You can't just go and cross everything out without saying anything. 7 years." Catherine smiled bitterly. "You know, these 7 years I tried not to see who you really are." Mark was taken aback. "What? What are you saying?" Catherine gave him a look full of hatred. "Do you think I don't know about you and Mom?" Mark recoiled as if from a slap. "What? What are you talking about?" He couldn't believe his ears. "About you and Mom, that was absurd. Could Catherine really be hinting at an affair with Leela? That was insane. You were her favorite, weren't you?" Catherine spoke quietly, hatred dripping from every word. "Always whispering, sharing secrets. She trusted you more than she trusted me." "Cat, wait. You were jealous of your own mother?" Mark tried to comprehend. "There was never anything between me and Layla like you apparently imagined. She treated me like a son." To her son. Catherine snorted. "She rewrote the will, didn't she? You think I don't know?" Mark froze. "A will? Where are you from?" Catherine stopped short, realizing she had said too much. A tense silence hung in the room. Mark felt, here it is, something important. "So she rewrote it," he said slowly. "But I don't know anything about it." Catherine grinned evilly. "Of course. St. Mark is completely unknown." She walked around the bed, came close to him. She smelled of alcohol. She probably had a drink for courage. Her eyes were shining. "You're not getting a cent of Mom's inheritance, do you hear me?" she said through gritted teeth. "Don't even dream about it. Everything Mom owns belongs to our family, not you." Mark was confused, trying to grasp the essence. Why was there talk of inheritance all of a sudden? Layla had helped them in life, yes, but now he himself had no claim to anything. And besides, wasn't Catherine automatically an heir? "Catherine, listen. I have no claim to the inheritance," he said carefully. "I myself just learned from you that she rewrote the will." "To whom? To you?" Catherine's lips curled. "Don't lie. You see, she wanted to provide for a decent man." She said the last words mockingly, obviously quoting someone's old words. Mark recognized Layla said this about him. "I thought I didn't hear their conversations." Mark began to understand. Catherine had overheard his and Leela's conversations sometime. Perhaps the one on the veranda. His heart sank. She knew Leela suspected her of cheating. "So you heard then?" He began, but Catherine interrupted him, pointing her finger at his chest. "Yes, I heard her say that I was cheating on you. I heard how she was going to leave everything to you." There were hysterical notes in her voice. "To secretly bequeath our property to my own husband, and she even lectured me." Mark blinked, stunned. That was where all the hatred came from. Catherine had found out about Leela's plans. Leela had probably tried to talk to her daughter, accused her of cheating, and they had a row. Maybe Catherine was angry at her mother, too. "Catherine," he said more softly, trying to change his tone, "did you really cheat on me?" The wife raised her chin. "Well, what would you do if you found out? You are so principled, perfect." Mark felt his throat tighten. She didn't deny it. She didn't utter a word of remorse. "Who is he asked quietly. Catherine chuckled. "What difference does it make? We're done for anyway." Mark's legs buckled, and he sat on the edge of the bed, pushing her suitcase away. His hands were shaking, so it was true. Leela was right. Catherine had cheated on him. Catherine, as if encouraging herself with anger, continued, "Why do you think I drove you away today? I was in a hurry because I have a man waiting for me who really loves me. Unlike you." Mark raised his head in shock. "I've always loved you. Did I do something wrong? You didn't even try to talk to save the marriage." "The marriage can't be saved," she snapped. "It was over a long time ago, Mark. It's just that neither you nor my mother wanted to see it." The front door suddenly slammed downstairs. They both jumped. Footsteps were heard in the hallway. Catherine exhaled nervously. He came. Mark stood up, not believing his ears. "He is. You brought him to our house." Catherine pulled the zipper on the second suitcase the rest of the way. "Yes. Surprised? It's okay. You'll get used to it." A tall man appeared in the bedroom door. Mark recognized David, an old family friend with whom Catherine had once studied at college. David worked as a lawyer in a large firm. Mark sometimes met him at social events. I would never have thought. But there he stood, boldly embracing the setting with his gaze. "Everything okay?" David asked Catherine, as if Mark wasn't in the room. He was unashamed, holding a bottle of champagne, his coat dripping onto the floor. "Yes, dear," Catherine replied, casting a sharp glance at her husband. "We're almost done." Mark felt sick at the scene. He didn't want to show his humiliation in front of David. He turned sharply towards the closet. "I'll pack my things and leave." Catherine snorted. "Good idea." She picked up her suitcases. David put the bottle on the dresser and began helping Catherine button her coat. "I hope you have a place to stay, Mark," David said, almost cheerfully. "The hotels are full right now." Mark gritted his teeth, pulling out his gym bag and throwing in the first thing he could find, a couple of shirts, jeans. He kept quiet, trying not to lose his temper. That was all they needed to see him angry. No, he wouldn't give them that satisfaction. Catherine followed her lover to the door. She paused for a moment, looking at Mark. "I'll file for divorce. We'll get it done quickly. Don't even think about delaying." He nodded silently. "And one more thing," she added. "Don't you dare lay claim to Mom's inheritance. I need it more, and it would be right for Mom to do so." Mark even chuckled at this audacity. "For God's sake, take it. I don't need dirty money." Catherine turned pale, but quickly pulled herself together. "Smart move. Right. Better not to interfere." David took her arm. "It's time to go." Catherine was about to leave, but turned around one last time. "I'll send the rest of my things later." Mark turned away, unwilling to watch them go. He heard their footsteps on the stairs, then the front door slammed. The house was silent again. He sank to the floor. His whole body was shaking. What had seemed like a bad dream was reality. His wife had cheated on him, and now she had openly left him for her lover. He had been kicked out not only of his home, but of his entire former life. Despite the anger and hurt, there were no tears. There was only petrified devastation. Mark stood up, slowly looking around the bedroom. There were photos of him and Catherine together on the wall, smiling happily a year ago on the beach. Now the photos seemed like a mockery. He walked over and took down one of the frames, looked at their smiling faces, and angrily threw the photo into the wastepaper bin. A dim light shone in the hallway. Mark went downstairs. They had lived here as a family just a week ago. Everything changed in an instant. He walked into the kitchen. There was a folder with some documents on the table. Mark recognized his wife's handwriting. Apparently, she was preparing divorce papers or something related to her mother's inheritance. Curiosity got the better of him. He opened the folder. Inside were copies of Leela's death certificate, some legal forms, and an application for inheritance. All in the name of Catherine. Mark pulled out the sheet and ran his eyes over it. Legal heir, movable and immovable property. He suddenly realized Catherine had already filed the inheritance papers, indicating that she was the sole heir. Not a word about the will, as if it did not exist. He remembered how she had let slip about the rewritten will. So Leela had indeed changed the will, but Catherine had hidden it, acting as if there was no will and the inheritance was simply passing to her by law as her daughter. If so, she was committing fraud. Mark clenched his fists, but he didn't have the strength to figure it out right now. It only confirmed how low she had fallen. Taking the folder as evidence, he shoved it into his bag. Perhaps it would come in handy later. Half an hour later, Mark came out of the house with a bag over his shoulder. He carefully closed the door, not slamming it. This house no longer felt like his home. The rain had almost stopped. Mark turned up the collar of his jacket and threw his bag on the back seat of the car. Where to now? He would go to a motel on the highway. He didn't have the strength to spend the night in an empty house full of ghosts. The car moved smoothly. Mark glanced in the rearview mirror, the dark windows of the bedroom. The next few days were a blur for Mark. He checked into a cheap motel off the highway, processing what had happened alone. Catherine didn't call. Just an email from her, a cold message. "I've filed for divorce. Sign when you get it." No apology or attempt to discuss. Mark quit his job for a couple of days, citing a funeral and personal circumstances. He barely slept, tormented by questions. Anger came in waves, then gave way to emptiness. The only outlet was memories of Lyle. He wanted to call one of his friends, but the shame of his situation stopped him. On the third day after the funeral, during the day, Mark was sitting on his motel bed, staring at the TV as usual, when his cell phone rang. The number was not identified. Mark waited for a couple of rings, but finally answered. "Hello, Mark. This is Alan Walker, Leela Green's attorney. We don't know each other, but I have something to talk to you about," the male voice said confidently and businesslike. Mark tensed up. "Layla's lawyer?" "Yes, I'm listening." "My belated condolences," Walker said. "I understand you're going through a difficult time. Your mother-in-law's will names you as a beneficiary. I need to discuss some details with you about her last will and testament." Mark even stood up. The will? The beneficiaries? He could hardly think. There was a will, and he was there. But then why didn't Catherine tell him? Or did she? "Excuse me, are you sure?" he asked again. "As far as I know, my wife, Layla's daughter, is going to inherit by law. She did not mention a will." There was a pause on the line. Then the lawyer continued cautiously. "That's exactly why I'm calling. The thing is, Layla Green changed her will shortly before her death, and you, Mark, according to that document, are the primary heir to her property." Mark was taken aback. "The main heir? This honestly surprises me." "I see. In any case, I think you should discuss this in person. You may not have known about the will, but now that Miss Green has passed away, the matter falls under the jurisdiction of the county probate court." Mark remembered the folder he had taken from home. It contained papers in which Catherine had claimed to be the heir. If there was a will, it meant that Catherine had either hidden it or, worse, forged another one. Alarm flared in his head. "Alan," he switched to the first name. "Thank you for letting me know. Of course, I need to meet you. When and where?" "The sooner the better," the lawyer replied. "Even today. My office is in downtown Seattle. I can send you the address via text." Mark agreed. It was the call that changed everything. He felt it. After disconnecting, he looked at the phone for a few seconds, not believing that this was happening. Layla did include him in the will, as she said, but how did Catherine manage to hide it? And he was named the primary heir, not his daughter. There's clearly something fishy going on here. He dressed quickly, feeling a surge of energy for the first time in days. He had to figure this out. If Catherine had cheated on the will, it was illegal and vile. But had Leela seen this coming? An hour later, Mark pulled up to an office building in the city center. He took the elevator up and found the right door. Alan Walker, probate attorney. As soon as he entered, a man of about 60, gray-haired, with a neat beard and glasses, came out to meet him. He extended his hand. "Mark, nice to meet you, albeit under unfortunate circumstances. I'm Alan Walker." Mark shook hands. "Likewise, thank you for finding me." They walked into the office. Walker motioned for them to sit down opposite the desk and sat down in a chair. There was a folder of documents on the desk in front of him. I was Leela Green's personal lawyer for several years, he began. She came to me in July to change her will. Originally, she was supposed to have only her daughter, Catherine, as her heir. But Leela had the right to change her mind. Mark nodded without interrupting, although his heart was beating faster. According to the new will, Walker continued, Lila has named you, Mark, as her primary heir. You will inherit her house, all her bank accounts and shares, as well as several valuable paintings. What? Was all Mark could say. He had expected something, but not something of this size. A house on an island? Shares? Catherine is also mentioned in the will, the lawyer clarified. She is to receive some of her mother's personal belongings, family jewelry, and, let's say, a symbolic sum. Symbolic? Mark asked again. Alan Walker smiled slightly at the corner of his lips. Yes, $1. It's called a symbolic inheritance. In this way, Layla confirmed that she was deliberately leaving her daughter nothing substantial. Mark leaned back in his chair. Layla had decided to practically write everything off to him, not her daughter. It turned out that she really was disappointed in Catherine, or wanted to teach her a lesson for something. I should point out, Walker added, that Layla included what's called a moral clause in her will. She stated that if any heir tries to challenge the will or commits illegal actions related to the inheritance, then he loses his right to the inheritance. At this point is quite strict, but completely legal. Mark frowned. Moral reservation. So if Catherine, for example, decides to sue or does something illegal, she won't even get that dollar. That's right, the lawyer nodded. Layla clearly wanted to protect her will from interference. He opened the folder and showed a sheet. Here is a copy of the will, Layla's signature, the witnesses, the notary. Everything is legally perfect. Mark skimmed the document. Indeed, it was all laid out clearly. He, Mark Wilson, would get everything. Catherine Wilson would get $1 and some change, a couple thousand more for charity, and a small donation to the church where Leela went. I'm shocked, Mark admitted, but I don't understand at all why Catherine is then claiming her rights as the sole heir. Did she know about this will for sure? Walker clenched his fingers. This is what raises questions for me. The thing is, I was shocked when I learned that a week earlier, a different version of Layla's will had been presented to the court. Another version? Mark leaned forward. Yes, Walker nodded. I wasn't informed right away because usually when a client dies, the lawyer goes to the relatives himself. But for some reason, Catherine Green Wilson didn't notify me about her mother's death, but filed the documents herself. She presented the court with a will according to which all the property goes to her, the daughter, and you are not mentioned there at all. Mark felt a chill. Here it was, confirmation of his fears. Have you seen this document? He asked. Of course, the lawyer's face took on a displeased expression. Catherine enclosed a copy, supposedly signed by Leela and two witnesses, without a notary, dated a day later than the real will. In this false document, your mother-in-law allegedly changed her mind and decided to give everything to her daughter. I immediately realized that something was fishy because Leela did not tell me anything about a new change of plans, and the handwriting is suspicious. Mark clenched his fists, both furious and horrified by the cold-bloodedness with which Catherine, and perhaps her accomplices, certainly David, her lawyer lover, had pulled this off. Can we prove that that will is forged? He asked firmly. Walker nodded. I am already preparing a motion to suspend the consideration of the inheritance case and appoint an expert examination. Forging a will is a criminal offense, a form of fraud and legal forgery, punishable by up to 5 years in prison and a large fine. We have every reason to believe that the document presented is fake. Firstly, I have the original of the real will in my hands, certified by a notary and kept in a bank. Secondly, Layla's signature on the fake one is most likely an imitation. A handwriting examination will show this. Thirdly, we need to question the aforementioned witnesses. Who signed it? Mark turned pale, imagining how Catherine could have found false witnesses. The lawyer leafed through the papers. A certain John Smith and Emily Gates. These names mean nothing to me. I don't remember such people among Layla's circle. Perhaps you know? Mark shook his head. No, it could be anyone. Maybe David's or Richard's friends. He remembered that Richard, his stepfather, could well have been involved, although there was no evidence of his involvement yet. They're probably front men, Walker agreed, but we'll find out. The best approach is to involve the police or the prosecutor's office, because falsifying a will is a crime against justice. But first, you need to officially declare to the court that you have a genuine will. Mark exhaled. Oh my God. Alan, thank you so much for not letting this lie happen. If it weren't for you, they would have pulled it off. The lawyer smiled. That's what decent lawyers are for. By the way, I'm extremely upset that my colleague from David Holt's firm seems to have had a hand in this too. David Holt? Mark asked. Yes, the lawyer who filed the documents with your wife. I know him from professional circles. He is quite skilled, but here the ethical limit has clearly been crossed. Mark gritted his teeth. David, Catherine's lover, had used his position as a lawyer to help her steal her inheritance. It was a conspiracy, it seemed. Walker continued. It is important to act quickly now. I have already informed the judge that a new circumstance has arisen the original will. The judge has suspended the decision on Catherine's inheritance. A hearing is scheduled for a week. So until Catherine got access to the accounts and property? Mark asked. Yes, everything is frozen until the matter is clarified, the lawyer confirmed. But she already considered the house to be hers, for example. As far as I know, she was there after the funeral. She evicted me, Mark smiled bitterly. Walker shook his head sympathetically. I understand that this is affecting you personally from several sides, now both the divorce and the inheritance. It's an unfortunate coincidence. That's putting it mildly, Mark sighed. What should I do? Right now, sign this. The lawyer pushed the document towards him. Power of attorney to represent your interests. And also a statement that you accept the inheritance according to the will, so that the court has no doubts about your claim. Mark took the pen and, almost without reading, signed, completely trusting this man, whom, oddly enough, Layla had found and tested over time. Excellent. Walker stapled the papers together. Now, Mark, I need all the information you can give me that might help me investigate the forgery. Do you have anything on hand? Mark nodded and took out a folder from his bag that he had taken from home. I grabbed the documents that Catherine prepared. Here are the statements and a copy of that forged will, I think. Walker perked up. Wonderful. Let's see. He took out a copy of the will, glanced at it, and chuckled. Uneven font, without a notary. Layla would never have written it like that, amateurish. The lawyer took a copy for himself. This is material evidence. With your permission, I will hand it over to the investigator when the case reaches the police. Mark suddenly felt alarmed. What if Catherine and David destroy the original fake or deny everything? Walker adjusted his glasses. We have a copy, plus the original of the real will, plus living witnesses to its signing, a notary and an assistant who will confirm that Layla bequeathed everything to you. This is heavy evidence against your wife and her accomplice. Mark nodded silently. He still couldn't comprehend that his wife, now almost ex, had committed a criminal offense by forging her late mother's will. It was beyond the pale, but the facts were there. At the end of the meeting, Walker placed an encouraging hand on his shoulder. Hold on, Mark. I believe the truth is on our side. The court will sort it out. In the meantime, do not take any action on your own. Do not try to talk to Catherine or David about the fake. Do not warn them, let them think that everything is going according to their plan. Okay, Mark agreed. I don't want to talk to them. And one more thing, the lawyer added, standing up. You can go back to Layla's house right now, because it actually belonged to her, which means that as an heir you have the right to take care of the property. Moreover, the judge temporarily prohibited Catherine from doing anything with the property. Mark's eyes lit up. So I can go back to the house. Yes, moreover, if she is in your way, you can involve the police. But it is better to do it peacefully. Just move and change the locks, since this is your legal inheritance. Mark felt relieved. He had nowhere to go these last few days, and now he had the house where he had spent so much time with Layla. It was like returning to a warm place, even if it was under tragic circumstances. Thank you, Alan. I will do so. After parting ways with his lawyer, Mark went outside. The sun was shining over the skyscrapers after days of rain. He breathed in the cool air, feeling that at last there was a ray of hope. That call had really changed everything. Instead of despair, he now had a goal: to restore justice. For the first time in a long time, Mark allowed himself a weak smile. Leela had good reason to trust him. He would do anything to justify her faith. And Catherine, it seemed, had trapped herself, deciding to deceive both the law and her conscience. The very next day, Mark was heading to Layla's house, determined to take over. The house was in a picturesque location on the shore of the bay in a quiet area. On the way, Mark stopped at a hardware store and bought a new lock for the front door, as the lawyer had advised. As he pulled up, he noticed Catherine's car in the driveway. His heart sank she was here. He had hoped to find the house empty, but apparently Catherine had decided to temporarily live in her mother's house, perhaps afraid to stay in their shared home because of the scandal. Or she was cooking something. Mark parked the car nearby. As he got out, he saw that the front door was ajar. He could hear voices from inside. Mark recognized the voice of his stepfather, Richard, and muffled Catherine. He walked calmly up the steps of the porch. There was no doubt. The house now belonged to the inheritance fund, that is, to Layla, and he was the official executor of the will. He had papers from the lawyer, if that mattered. Mark walked inside, stepping over the threshold. In the living room, among partially packed boxes apparently, Catherine had been packing her mother's things here, stood Catherine, her stepfather Richard, and her lover David. All three turned at the sound of footsteps. An oppressive silence reigned. Catherine turned pale, then flared up with anger. "What are you doing here?" Mark got over his excitement and answered firmly. "I'm going back home." David stepped forward, grinning. "As far as I know, this is Layla's house, which means that now Catherine is her heir. So you have no right." "You're wrong," Mark snapped. "I have every right." From his inside pocket, he pulled out a copy of the court order Walker had given him, the stay of succession, and a copy of the will, the main page with his name listed as heir. He wasn't going to flash them the moral reservation or the whole will yet, but he needed to show he wasn't an imposter. Mark handed the documents to Richard, as the oldest in the company. "Here, take a look." Richard frowned, took out his glasses, and began to read. His face slowly turned red. David also looked over his stepfather's shoulder. Catherine looked nervously from one to the other. "What is it?" She couldn't resist. Richard looked up at Mark. "What kind of joke is this? Where did you get this?" "From the court," Mark answered calmly. "This is Layla's true will, my mother-in-law, the will in which she named me the primary heir to her estate, and the court's ruling that your rights, Catherine, are suspended for now because you presented another document that raises doubts." Catherine turned as pale as a sheet. "What? This can't be." David snatched the paper from Richard, glanced at it, then crumpled it up. "Amazing. Bravo, Mark. Where did you get the fake will? Did you draw it yourself?" Mark felt the heat of anger, but kept himself under control. "It's funny to hear that from a specialist in fake papers. I don't have to draw anything. Layla's will was kept by her lawyer, as it should be, and it's real." Catherine seemed to turn to stone, then screamed hysterically. "No, she couldn't. It's a fake." Richard sank heavily onto the sofa. "So, Layla really is," he said quietly, not finishing the sentence. David put his arm around Catherine's shoulders, reassuring her. "Don't worry, dear. We'll challenge it. They won't succeed." Mark took a step forward, looking straight at David. "Are you ready to challenge yourself? I wonder how forging a will is a crime, David. Punishable, as you should know, by imprisonment. And now investigators are looking into this." Mark was bluffing about the investigators. It hadn't reached the police yet, but he wanted to scare them. The words worked. David loosened his grip on Catherine's shoulders. Richard stood up. Investigators, this is a family matter. Why involve? Mark interrupted. Family? When documents are falsified and the court is deceived for self-interest, that is a criminal case, Richard. I do not intend to hush up such a family matter. Catherine, pale but angry, spat out. So you decided to trample me into the dirt. Isn't it enough for you that your mother left you everything? Mark turned to her abruptly. It wasn't me who decided, it was your mother. And don't tell me that she couldn't. She told me herself that she would take such a step if... He fell silent, not wanting to reveal that Leela knew about the betrayal. However, Catherine understood. Ah, here it is. Mommy decided to punish me and reward you, huh? How petty. Tears of anger flashed in her eyes. Enough, Mark said calmly. Enough lies. The three of you have conspired to destroy me, to rob me. I will not allow it. David raised his eyebrows. Three of us? You're going to blame us all? Do you have any evidence? Mark looked straight at him. So far I only know about you and Catherine for sure. And then we'll see if the role of the stepfather comes up. Richard exhaled loudly and stood between them, raising his hands. Gentlemen, let's not make a scene. Catherine, David, leave Mark and me for a minute, okay? Catherine looked at him in surprise. Stepfather, you. Richard repeated firmly. Please, I need to talk to him alone. David wanted to object, but Catherine tugged at his sleeve. Let's go. She glared at Mark. We'll see how it all ends. As they walked out onto the porch, Richard motioned for Mark to sit down. Mark remained standing, arms crossed. Well, the stepfather began after a pause. I must admit, the situation is complicated. Of course, I am shocked by Layla's actions. But no matter. Listen, Mark. As the eldest in the family, I want to settle this peacefully. Mark raised an eyebrow skeptically. Peacefully. That is, so that I voluntarily give you the inheritance. Richard coughed. Well, let's say he found a compromise. After all, you don't really need this property, right? You have a job, your own life. But Catherine is her biological daughter. She was counting on her mother's support. This is her childhood home, by the way. Mark winced quietly. Childhood home. Catherine grew up in a completely different house. This one Layla bought after marrying Richard. But he remained silent. Get to the point, Richard, he said dryly. Richard rubbed his hands. Okay, you're coming into the inheritance, probably. But what if you could, like, refuse, or give the house to Catherine, say, for compensation? He looked straight at Mark. I'm ready to pay you personally to smooth things over. For example, $2 million. Mark couldn't hide his surprise. $2 million. Richard nodded. Yes, cash or whatever you want. Just leave the house and everything to Catherine. Mark took a deep breath. He had expected anything but such a sum. Where did Richard get such money? Perhaps he had his own riches. That's a generous offer, Mark replied slowly. But do you realize that the inheritance itself might be worth more? I don't know the exact value of Layla's assets. Richard chuckled. I assure you, all the property, this house, the account, etc., does not exceed $2 million in value. I am practically offering you the market value so that you will step aside. Why do you need this, Richard? Mark asked bluntly. Catherine isn't your blood daughter. You married Leela recently. Your marriage wasn't the best. Did she leave you almost everything in her original will? Richard winced. None of your business. Let's say I promised Leela I'd take care of her daughter. I want Catherine to be happy. Mark shook his head. It's funny to hear, considering that it turns out you cheated on her and she can't stand you. The stepfather flared up. Who told you such nonsense? It doesn't matter. Mark waved his hand. I'll be honest. Your offer looks like a bribe for my silence and refusal. And it's illegal, by the way. Richard frowned. I'm just proposing a deal. A deal that violates the will of the deceased and bypasses the court. Mark grinned. It looks like an attempt to bribe a witness or participant in a case, don't you think? This is outside the legal framework. Stop it. Richard began to lose patience. No one will know. We'll just come to an amicable agreement. Mark glanced through the window and saw the shadows of Catherine and David on the porch, apparently listening to the conversation. No, Richard, he said firmly. I'm not going to accept this check for $2 million, or whatever you offer. I don't want to be part of your scam. The stepfather narrowed his eyes. Have you thought about it? It's a lot of money, and courts are a long process, nerves, reputation. You want to live in peace, don't you? That's why I chose the truth, Mark replied, looking him in the eye. Take your check. He turned and headed towards the front door. Richard called after him. You'll regret this, boy. Mark turned around at the threshold. Possibly, but I doubt it. He stepped out onto the porch, where he immediately encountered Catherine and David. They were trying to pretend they were just standing there, but Mark knew they had heard everything. Without saying a word, he walked past them to his car. From the trunk, he took a box of tools and a new lock. What are you doing? David asked defiantly. I'm putting in a new lock, Mark answered calmly. I assume you don't have anything left here other than what's already packed. You can take it and leave the keys. Catherine's eyes widened. Are you kicking me out of my mother's house? Weren't you the one who kicked me out of mine? Mark snapped, giving her an icy look. The only difference is that I do everything legally and you don't. Catherine blushed and fell silent. David clenched his fists. You'll regret this, Mark. I've already heard, he muttered, walking back into the house. Half an hour later, Catherine, David, and Richard left, taking with them the few boxes they had managed to pack. Mark even helped carry them out, a gesture of goodwill. They did not thank them. Catherine said goodbye with a see you later. When their cars had disappeared, Mark finally latched the door. The house was empty. Only memories of Leela remained, photographs on the walls, her favorite chair by the window. Mark sank tiredly into the chair. He did it return of the owner it happened. Although he did not yet feel like a full-fledged master, he at least restored justice to the house. The exiled man returned innocently, and the exiles suffered their first defeat. More battles lay ahead, lawsuits, perhaps revenge from the wronged. But now Mark felt relieved. In the silence that followed, he felt safe for the first time in a long time. Neither Catherine nor her accomplices could enter here without his permission. He changed the lock and took a deep breath. Mark looked around the living room and noticed a picture on the shelf. Him, Catherine, and Leela at Christmas a couple of years ago. Everyone was smiling, like a happy family. He picked up the frame and looked at it for a long moment. A lump formed in his throat. Well, the past couldn't be brought back now. He set the frame face down. Dusk was falling. Mark stood up and turned on the desk lamp. This was his home now, though perhaps not for long. The judge had yet to approve the inheritance. But he was confident. The law was on his side. Tired from the day, he went up to the bedroom where he had once spent the night with Catherine, a guest of Leela. The bed was made. He lay down on top of the covers and looked at the ceiling. Suddenly, he remembered the safe that Leila had in her closet. He had seen her put documents in there earlier. Perhaps there might be something important there, including confirmation of everything that was happening. Mark stood up and walked over to the closet. In the corner, behind the clothes, he could see the door of a small built-in safe. He knew the code. Leila had once asked him to get documents when she couldn't because of the pain in her hand, and she had entrusted him with the combination. He punched in the numbers for her late father's birthday. The lock clicked. Inside were folders of papers and a stuffed devil, a talisman that Leila kept for good luck. Mark carefully took out the contents. Among the folders, one immediately caught his eye, on which was handwritten, "Personal Mark." His heart was pounding. He opened it. Inside was a letter in an envelope marked, "Read this when it's over," and a pile of documents, bank statements, some diagrams with arrows, printouts of emails. On top was a sticky note with Leila's mark, SEC, and a phone number. Mark gasped. SEC Securities and Exchange Commission. Leila had apparently collected materials for this organization. She remembered what she had said about suspicions about Richard. It turned out that it was not only about his love affairs, but also about financial matters. He glanced at some of the papers, Richard's correspondence with some people, references to offshore company accounts, a cash flow chart. It was all complicated, but one thing was clear: Leela has collected legally verified schemes indicating possible illegal financial activities of the stepfather. For example, here is a letter that spoke of insider information in a stock deal. Another is about a secret account in Switzerland. Mark felt his insides go cold. Richard was involved in the scheme. Perhaps Leela had learned of her husband's financial crimes and decided to report them to the SEC, as many responsible citizens do when cooperating with investigators. The phone number was probably a contact at the SEC. Now it was clear why Richard was willing to give up $2 million. He was probably afraid that Mark would find these documents. Richard could guess that Leela was keeping something. And if Mark took possession, he could find it. So the stepfather was trying to buy everything from him before it was too late. Mark sat down at the table, looking through the papers more closely. Here was flawlessly collected evidence: transaction dates, names, copies of contracts. Layla must have been preparing for a long time. Perhaps she wanted to become an SEC whistleblower to expose her husband. And again, she entrusted these materials to Mark. The folder was aimed directly at him. He took out his mobile phone and dialed the number given by Layla without hesitation. The voice of the SEC secretary in Washington responded. "Securities and Exchange Commission, Division of Enforcement, how can I help?" Mark quickly collected his thoughts. "Hello, my name is Mark Wilson. I have information about possible securities violations that was collected by Layla Green. She was cooperating with someone on your commission, but unfortunately, she recently died. I found a folder of documents with her. I think you should take a look at it." The operator asked to wait, then transferred the call. A minute later, a man appeared on the line. "Good afternoon, sir. I'm Special Agent Thompson with the SEC. You said you had information from Mrs. Green." Yes, Mark felt nervous. It seems she was gathering materials against Richard Green, her husband. "I think it's about insider trading or fraud. There is serious data here." "I see. We would like to receive these materials. Are you ready to hand them over?" "Of course. What is the best way to do this?" "Let's set up a meeting," the agent suggested. "Can you come to our regional office in Seattle tomorrow? Or, if it's more convenient, we can send staff to you." Mark thought, it's risky to leave with such documents. It's better to let them come. But the house was known to Richard, although he's unlikely to stick his nose in right now. "It's better at your place," Mark decided. "Tomorrow in the first half of the day." They agreed on the time and address of the office. After ending the call, Mark leaned back in his chair, his head spinning with revelations. Folder Layla turned out to be the key to many mysteries. It also held the answer to why Richard and company were so desperate to hold on to the inheritance and squeeze it out. It wasn't just the house, it was the dirt and possibly the big money tied to the crimes. Mark carefully gathered the papers back into the folder. He would soon have to cooperate with the SEC, as Layla herself began. He understood that this was serious. The SEC is a federal structure. They don't joke. But he is ready to go all the way to bring Layla's case to victory. Taking the envelope with a letter that said, "Read when it's all over," Mark decided to leave it sealed until all the processes were completed, as Leela had asked. He carefully put the letter back. He spent the night restlessly, tossing and turning with thoughts about what he had gotten himself into. But not once did he regret the path he had chosen. Everything was as if fate had given him a mission, not only to restore his good name and inheritance, but also to solve crimes. And in this, Layla's hand helped him, guiding him even after death. That morning, over coffee in the kitchen, Mark sketched out a plan for what to do next. Today, he would turn over the SEC materials and hear them out. He also needed to stay in touch with Walker, the attorney, about the will. And there was another front: the upcoming divorce. Although the divorce seemed like a mundane formality in the context of everything else, there could be pitfalls there too, especially if Catherine got angry. Mark wouldn't be surprised if Catherine tried to use the divorce to get revenge, perhaps by trying to sue for some of the property or making false accusations. He had to be prepared. But now he had a strong trump card, a moral reservation, and the facts of the crime. If Catherine persisted, he would not regret that prison awaited her. It was sad, but she had made her own choice. He was distracted from these thoughts by the noise of a car driving up. Mark looked out the window warily. A police car was parking in the yard. He stepped out onto the porch just as a police officer got out of the car. The young policeman approached. "Good morning, Mr. Mark Wilson." "Yes, it's me." Mark became wary. "I'm Officer Jacobs with the Seattle Police Department. We have a court order temporarily restraining us from disposing of the property of Mrs. Leela Green in any way until the matter is resolved. I'm instructed to interview you and make sure everything is in order here." Mark frowned, but quickly realized that this was probably David's petition through the court, trying to make his life difficult. However, the order only prohibited him from disposing of it, that is, selling or damaging it, and he had no intention of doing so. "I understand, officer," he replied calmly. "I am the current executor of Mrs. Green's will. I have the papers. Of course, I will not do anything against the rules. I am only guarding the house and property until the court decides." The officer nodded. "Excellent. Representatives of Mrs. Catherine Wilson tried to contact you yesterday, but were unable to get through." Mark remembered that he had turned off his phone for the night. That was probably why they were calling. "Now I'm in touch. If you have any questions, I'll answer them." The policeman wrote something down in his notebook. "Good. And also, I have been instructed to warn both parties to stay away from each other until the trial so that there are no incidents. Try to avoid direct contact with Mrs. Wilson." Mark chuckled. "I didn't intend to." "Thank you, officer." When the patrol left, Mark exhaled. It seemed that David had started maneuvering. He had managed to get the court to formally prohibit him from, for example, changing the locks or taking anything out. But the lock had already been changed, and he wasn't going to take anything out. The main thing was to keep everything. However, to meet the SEC with a police injunction on disposal. However, handing over documents to the SEC is not a disposition of property, so it is not prohibited. But just in case, he will ask permission from the lawyer. He quickly dialed Walker. "Alan, here's the thing. I have some documents belonging to Leela that I wanted to take to the SEC because they might contain evidence against Richard. Are there any restrictions?" Walker replied, "The resolution only concerns property, but documents, especially those related to a possible crime, can be handed over to the authorities. This is not prohibited, moreover, it is commendable." Mark thanked him with relief and collected Layla's folder into his briefcase. At the SEC regional office, Mark was met by Special Agent Thompson, a trim man in his 40s, wearing a business suit. He carefully reviewed the materials Mark had brought. Some documents particularly interested him, such as correspondence indicating insider trading. Richard had exchanged confidential information with third parties before making stock trades. "This is very serious evidence," Thompson concluded, leafing through the papers. "It appears that Richard Green may have been involved in securities violations and possibly tax fraud. Thank you for bringing this. Do you know if Mrs. Green was planning to formally come forward as a whistleblower?" Mark shook his head. "She didn't have time to tell me anything. But judging by her folder, yes, there is a contact. The meeting time was set for a week after her death. Apparently, she was going to come to you." The agent frowned. "Sad. Well, now you'll do it, basically. If you don't mind, we might need your help." "Of course, I'm ready to cooperate," Mark said confidently. Thompson looked at him carefully. "Keep in mind, this could be dangerous. Richard may not be acting alone, but we will provide cover. With this kind of evidence, we will probably involve the FBI, since this is a criminal case." He made a few calls and then returned. "So, Mr. Wilson, here's our plan. We'll be investigating financial crimes. But at the same time, you have a conflict over inheritance." Mark nodded. "Yes, they have already forged the will, tried to bribe me. Now, having lost their advantage, they can do anything. By the way, yesterday my stepfather offered me $2 million to refuse. The agent raised an eyebrow. Have you tried to bribe me yet? This is important. Offering a bribe in exchange for silence or waiver of rights is also a crime. Mark smiled involuntarily. He knew that the conversation with Richard yesterday could have been recorded. It's a pity he didn't think of it, but it can still be fixed. He might try again, Mark said, perhaps using different methods. Thompson exchanged glances with his colleague. Are you ready to make contact with them under our supervision? Mark quickly got the idea. Do you want to do wiretapping and setting a trap? True. For example, arrange a meeting where you allegedly agree to their terms or are ready to discuss them, and we record the conversation, the agent explained. There, you see, a lot will be revealed about a forged will and about possible threats or bribes and perhaps about financial fraud. Mark felt excitement and adrenaline. I agree, but how to organize it? Thompson smiled. We will contact the FBI, since it is easier for them to authorize audio and video recording. Federal law allows recording a conversation with the consent of one participant, so there is no problem. What you are required to do is essentially play a role. The agent and his colleagues quickly mapped out a plan. A couple of hours later, FBI agent Miller joined the conversation. A burly man in casual clothes introduced himself, showed his badge. He was given the gist of the matter. Miller clarified. So, we have a whole bouquet: extortion, forgery, securities fraud, possibly tax violations as well. I have already agreed with the prosecutor. We can act. He laid out the dictaphone device on the table. We will equip you with a hidden microphone and transmitter. The recording will be sent to us in real time. We also want, if possible, video recording either with a hidden camera on your clothes, or we will choose a place with our own cameras. Mark listened, feeling like he was in a movie, but it was serious. Together, they plotted how to lure the trio into talking. They decided that Mark would initiate the call to Richard, hinting that he had changed his mind about the deal. This bait would probably work. Richard would be eager to save his own skin, and Catherine and David would want to regain control. The location chosen was neutral Layla's house, the very one where it all began. This way, the equipment could be installed in advance. Are you sure you want it right in your home? The FBI agent asked. Mark nodded. I think so. They've been there before. It's familiar to them. And for me, it's a territory where I feel more confident. Okay, Miller agreed. Then let's do it this way. We'll disguise ourselves as technicians and install a couple of micro cameras and microphones in the living room and disguise them. We'll set up a capture team in the next room or nearby to intervene when we've collected enough evidence or if you're in danger. Mark suddenly thought, what if they come with weapons or something else? They are not bandits, of course, but in desperation, who knows? Agent Thompson chuckled. I doubt that the lawyer and stepfather will rush to shoot, but just in case, there will be armed agents nearby, Miller assured. As soon as clearly illegal proposals or threats are made, we will intervene. Having discussed everything, Mark went home to get ready. He already had a transmitter with him, miniature, to put on a belt or under a shirt for backup, although the main recording would be done through stationary devices. That evening, Mark dialed Richard's number. He answered cautiously. Yes? Richard, this is Mark, he said as calmly as he could. I wanted to talk in detail. Pause. I'm listening. About your proposal yesterday, Mark said quietly. I think we can discuss options. There was a cautious interest on the other end of the line. Do you mean the option of reaching an amicable agreement? Exactly, Mark sighed, feigning doubt. I don't want long wars. It's better to decide everything now, confidentially. Richard coughed. Well, that's reasonable, but it's better to talk about this in person. Come to my place tomorrow evening, to Leela's house. All three of you, Catherine and David, since everyone is involved, Mark suggested. Richard hesitated slightly. Catherine, I'm not sure if she'll want to. Convince me. There is no other way. I want to close all the questions at once. Okay? What time? At 7 in the evening. Okay, we'll come. Mark turned off the phone and exhaled. His heart was pounding. They agreed. He immediately notified the agents. They will arrive tomorrow at noon to install the equipment. They had to coordinate everything with the local police so that they would be aware of the operation in case of shots and so on, but would not interfere without their signal. The day of preparation arrived. Around noon, a telephone company van pulled up to the house, an FBI van, in fact. A couple of agent technicians ran cables, supposedly repairing communications, and at the same time installed micro cameras. One was hidden in the body of a wall clock, the other in a ventilation grill. Microphones were disguised as decorative elements. Everything was tested. Mark was shown on a laptop, as if the living room was visible excellent. It covers the sofa, armchairs, and table. Mark looked closely. The wiretap was already running in the background, transmitting every sound. He jokingly asked if his thoughts were being eavesdropped, to which the agents laughed. By evening, everything was ready. The task force 4 agents was located in the basement of the house, where the monitors were brought out. If anything, they could run out via the internal staircase. They found such a way on purpose. Layla's basement connected to the house. A van was also parked nearby for appearances and for communication. Mark was a little on edge. He was given an inconspicuous receiver on his ear, through which the agents could prompt him or warn him. They also gave him a panic button, a small keychain. If he pressed it, an assault would begin immediately, if suddenly there was no other way. Try not to look directly at the cameras, Miller reminded. And don't touch the wires. But relax, we're close. Mark pulled himself together. The main thing was yet to come: threesome blackmail, not to endure, but to play. At exactly 7 o'clock in the evening, cars appeared at the house. Mark saw Richard, Catherine, and David getting out and heading for the door. He opened the door for them before they could knock. Come in. The trio entered cautiously, looking around. They knew the situation, however. Mark gestured to the living room. Have a seat. Catherine looked nervous. David was deliberately calm. Richard was businesslike and serious. They sat down, Catherine on a separate chair, the men on the sofa. Mark sat opposite. There was silence. Mark decided that they should speak, and he would listen. And sure enough, David spoke up, as the most legally literate. So, Mark, we came to hear you out. You mentioned compromise. What exactly are you proposing? Mark pretended to choose his words carefully. I suggest we consider what you are trying to achieve and what would suit me. Catherine chuckled. We want you to disappear from our lives and stop claiming what doesn't belong to you. Mark looked at her calmly. The question of ownership will be decided by the court. But let's be honest, the will is on my side. Catherine jumped up. A forged will. David pulled her up. Cat, calm down. Richard intervened. Okay, based on the facts. Technically, Mark does have Layla's will, but we don't need a public lawsuit. It will cast a shadow on the family's reputation and on yours too, Mark. I agree, Mark played along. I don't want a scandal. David nodded. That's why we're here. If we can work this out so that no one ends up in jail and everyone gets what they want. Mark noticed what David himself said about prison. Good. Let's be honest, Mark suddenly said. The 3 of you broke the law. Forging a will is a crime. Offering a bribe is too, and probably a whole bunch of other things. Catherine flushed. Oh, you. David raised his hand, stopping her lunge. Mark, we didn't come to argue. We came to agree. Mark could see Catherine's hands shaking. She was clearly on edge, but holding on. Very well, he replied. Here are my terms. Catherine agrees to a divorce on my terms, with no property claims and no alimony. The 3 of you acknowledge that Layla's will is genuine, and the one you presented earlier is a forgery. You agree not to contest it. Catherine gasped. Is this a joke? Mark continued calmly. And most importantly, Richard publicly admits to his financial fraud and cooperates with the investigation. These words hung like thunder. Richard turned purple. Are you crazy? David stood up. So, I see. You decided to rat us all out. Mark shrugged. I warned you. Mama Layla left me a file with all your dealings, Richard, and your will scan too. Richard looked at his daughter and David, then growled. Folder? What folder? Mark, feigning indifference, which you apparently didn't know about. It contained evidence of how you used inside information and defrauded investors. Layla was preparing to turn it over to the SEC. Richard jumped up. You're lying. There's nothing like that there. Want to check? Mark picked up a prepared copy of one of the most obvious pieces of evidence from the table, a printout of an email in which Richard discussed buying shares before the report was published, clearly indicating an insider deal. He threw the sheet of paper on the coffee table. Richard grabbed it, ran his eyes over it, and turned pale. Crap. David snatched the paper and quickly glanced at it. Yes, you can't show it like that. He muttered mechanically, then stopped short and looked at Mark. Have you already passed this on to the SEC? Mark smiled slightly. It is quite possible. Catherine covered her face with her hands. What? What does this all mean? Richard sank down onto the sofa. This means that your husband is a rat who is digging under all of us. Mark pretended to be indignant. I'm defending what is rightfully mine. It was you who started this crime, my dear. David threw the sheet on the table. Okay, Mark, that's enough. You've basically cornered everyone. What do you really want? Money, Mark snorted. I want justice. But money wouldn't hurt either, right? David tensed. How many? Mark pretended to think. Richard offered $2 million yesterday. Maybe we can raise it to 3 for everything. Catherine looked at her stepfather in horror. Did he give him money? Richard, wiping sweat from his forehead, did not answer. David asked sullenly. 3 million, and what in return? I'm leaving, I've renounced my inheritance, I'm not handing over the cases to the SEC, and I'm not seeking criminal charges against you, Mark listed. Richard nodded nervously. Excellent. 3, and we'll hush it all up. David gave him a withering look. 3 million is a huge sum, Richard. He has, Mark interjected. His secret accounts will do. Catherine seemed to be frozen. Is it true? Do you have secret money? Richard snapped. Shut up. It's none of your business now. Mark saw that the gang had cracked. They were angry with each other. David took the initiative again. Okay, let's say we agree to 3 million, but we need guarantees that you really won't. You won't turn you in, finished Mark. There will be a contract. Although I suppose you don't trust me just as I don't trust you. Catherine said angrily. I don't agree to anything. Let him die, but he won't get anything. I'd rather go to jail, Richard barked. Shut up, fool. It concerns you the least you have nothing now, and you won't have anything if you persist. Catherine recoiled as if from a slap. Nothing? It's all because of you, dirty old man. You got me and my mother involved in your business. Richard stood up abruptly. How dare you? Gentlemen, calm down, David intervened, but it was too late. If it weren't for you, Mom wouldn't have died, Catherine screamed hysterically. It was because of you that her heart couldn't take it when she found out you were deceiving her. Richard turned white. What? How did you? He stepped towards Catherine with his hand raised as if he wanted to hit her. David grabbed him. Hush, Richard. Mark realized it was time. He quietly pressed the hidden alarm button in his pocket and said loudly, It's all clear. That's enough. Catherine retreated to the wall, sobbing. Bastards. And you too, Mark. Sit here happy. Mark shook his head. Catherine, nothing can be fixed now. David looked at everyone with a cold gaze. Looks like there's no family here anymore. Okay, Mark, there will be money. But keep in mind, if you cheat, we'll hire people, they'll finish you off. He said it almost in a whisper, but the microphones picked it up. Mark knew for sure. That was a clear threat. Typical blackmail, Mark noted with a sad smile. Well then. The agents entered silently at the signal and showed their identification. FBI, freeze, hands. Special agents with weapons burst into the living room. Nobody moves. Richard froze. Catherine screamed and pressed herself against the wall. David cursed, raising his hands. Mark stepped aside, showing that he was above suspicion. Within seconds, all three were forced to the floor and handcuffed. The agents came in and caught them red-handed, having written down everything: confessions, threats, and the fact of the proposed bribe. "What? What's happening?" Catherine screamed through her tears. Agent Miller, showing his ID, announced, "Richard Green, Catherine Wilson, David Holt, you are under arrest for suspicion of extortion, forgery, fraud, and threats." He monotonously read out their rights to each person. "You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can be used against you in court." Mark stood watching his once loved ones now shackled. He expected triumph, but felt only bitterness. Catherine lay face down, crying. Richard muttered, "I won't say anything without a lawyer." David remained silent, clenching his teeth. As they were lifted up and led towards the exit, Catherine cast a dull glance at Mark. "How I hate you." Mark didn't answer. He had nothing to say to her in response to her hatred. It had gone too far. David said casually, "See you later." Mark also remained silent. It was doubtful that it would happen soon. Richard said nothing, looking at the floor. Within minutes, the house was empty. The agents took the detainees away to await further procedures. A couple of forensic scientists stayed behind to collect evidence, including the paper with the insider's evidence and that crumpled draft of the forged will. Agent Thompson gave Mark a friendly pat on the shoulder. "Excellent work. Everything is recorded and more than enough for accusations." Mark just nodded, feeling empty. He suddenly realized that he was incredibly tired. But the main thing was that it was all over. "Thank you," he said quietly to the agents. "I couldn't have done it without you." Miller smiled. "This is our job, and you are a brave guy." When the police left, Mark was left alone in the devastated living room. The door was broken down, things were scattered. But he was alive, unhurt, and morally satisfied that the truth had prevailed. He went out onto the porch. The night was starry and quiet. Mark took a deep breath of fresh air. The agents entered and arrested guilty. This was the turning point. Then it was up to the court. 2 months after the operation, the day of the final court hearing on the case of Layla's inheritance arrived, and at the same time, the criminal trial on charges against Catherine, Richard, and David ended. A lot has happened in these weeks. David made a plea deal, admitting to forging the will and testifying against Richard in an attempt to reduce his sentence. Richard, cornered by SEC evidence, also agreed to cooperate. He revealed his financial fraud, gave up his accomplices in insider schemes. He faced serious penalties under federal articles, but cooperation could soften them. At first, Catherine denied everything. Then, seeing that the others were testifying, she also admitted to participating in document forgery and extortion. Her lawyer tried to excuse herself by citing her emotional state and the influence of Richard and David. She, as someone who had no previous convictions and had agreed to an agreement, stood the least chance. Mark and Catherine's divorce was quick. Catherine, while under investigation, signed all the papers, refusing her property claims just to get it over with quickly. And so, the court found him right officially. In the Seattle County courtroom, a probate case was decided. The will of Leila Green of that date was considered valid, and the later document was considered forged and invalid. The judge, an elderly woman with a penetrating gaze, particularly noted. The Green case, unfortunately, showed the worst sides of family conflicts. But thanks to the evidence presented and the investigation, the truth was revealed. Leila Green's will was confirmed. According to it, Mark Wilson becomes the heir to the house, accounts, and property. Catherine Wilson receives only the symbolic $1 specified in her mother's will. At these words, Catherine, sitting with her head down on the bench, only shuddered. Her fate in civil terms was decided like this: $1. Mark's attorney, Alan Walker, asked to speak and drew the court's attention to that very section of the will. "Your Honor, I would like to emphasize the action conditions of moral reservation in the will according to paragraph 5. If any of the beneficiaries commits illegal acts against the last will of the deceased, then his right to inheritance is canceled. The judge frowned. Yes, I happened to read this remarkable clause. Mrs. Green clearly foresaw such a development. She turned to Catherine. Therefore, Mrs. Wilson, even this symbolic dollar cannot be transferred to you. The moral reservation comes into force automatically due to your admission of forgery of the will, that is, an act against the will of your mother. Catherine didn't look up. Her lawyer just nodded there was nothing to dispute. The judge sighed. In essence, Mrs. Green has disinherited her daughter completely, and the terms are such that it is impossible to restore her rights due to her own misdeeds. Well, the law allows such things, although it is unfortunate. Mark listened with a stony face. He wasn't gloating, no. He was rather sad to see Catherine's life ruined, but she had broken the trust herself. The court's decision was clear. The entire inheritance goes to Mark. He becomes the full owner of Layla's house, accounts, and other property. The court also approved him as the executor of all the will's wishes. After the meeting, Alan Walker shook Mark's hand. Congratulations. This is the end of a long journey. Now no one will encroach on your right. Mark thanked him with all his heart. Without you, I would not have achieved justice. The lawyer smiled. What are you saying? I was just doing my job, and Layla asked me about it once. He didn't finish, but Mark understood. His mother-in-law had warned the lawyer in advance to be on guard. She had calculated everything brilliantly. The court later handed down sentences. For his cooperation, David was given a 1-year suspended sentence and had his lawyer's license revoked, effectively destroying his career. Catherine, taking into account the confession and the influence of aggravating factors forgery of inheritance, received 1 year in prison and 2 years probation. She had to spend some time in prison, which she cried when the judge announced. But her lawyer said that in 6 months she could be released on parole. Richard, as the main swindler, faced the most punishment. But he also made a deal. He was giving away a big fish, an insider partner, and therefore the sentence was postponed. Preliminary talk was about 3 years in prison and a large fine in favor of the state. Mark was present when the verdicts were read. As Catherine was led out of the courtroom in handcuffs, she suddenly turned to him. Her eyes were full of tears. She said nothing, but she held his gaze for a second, full of conflicting emotions, anger, regret, pain. Mark didn't know what to say to her. He just nodded with a sad expression. Maybe someday, after all this storm, they would be able to understand each other. But for now, it was better to stay apart. Richard walked past arrogantly, looking away. His ego was hurt. He would not forgive the defeat. But Mark didn't care. He would never cross paths with this man again. When the legal proceedings were over, Walker, leaving the courthouse with Mark, said, "Now you are free, Mark, and you have the opportunity to dispose of the inheritance as you see fit for the good. I am glad that the law has prevailed." "Me too," Mark sighed. "The price was high, though." He turned to the closing court doors, behind which the shadows of past relationships had disappeared. But ahead was a life that needed to be rebuilt. Mark remembered Leela's words. "It's important to me that my daughter has a decent person next to her, even if she makes a mistake." He did everything he could, but he couldn't save the marriage or Catherine. But he remained true to his principles and didn't give in to dirty games. Layla's moral clause served its purpose. He who betrayed morality and the law was left with nothing. The court found him right, and justice prevailed both in the courtroom and in Mark's soul. Now it was time to move on to implement what he had planned when he gained control of the inheritance. A month later, Layla's house was transformed. Mark decided not to sell it, but to make it the center of a new good initiative. He remembered how Layla loved to help others. She volunteered at a shelter, donated to charity. In her spirit, Mark founded charitable foundation for helping victims of fraud and scams. He called it the Lila Green Foundation. Its purpose was to provide legal support and financial assistance to those who had suffered from fraud, corruption, family scams, all the things he had gone through. He used some of the money he inherited to fund the foundation. Also, by court order, a significant amount of Richard's fines were transferred to charity. This was a condition of the deal. Richard agreed to pay a large compensation to mitigate his punishment. This money went to the foundation, symbolically helping to correct the evil that Richard himself had caused. A house that breathes again, that's what Mark called Layla's mansion in his mind in recent days. Life was once again in full swing here. The foundation's office was located on the first floor. Several young volunteer lawyers were working on cases, consulting with the victims. Visitors were walking around the house, some bringing documents, some receiving advice. Mark lived on the second floor, having transformed himself from a depressed victim into an energetic leader of a good cause. He personally delved into the appeals. Sometimes the stories of deceived old people or people who lost money in scams touched him to the depths of his soul. He understood their pain, although his case was special. One of the Foundation's first initiatives was a program to raise awareness of heirs' rights, so that no one could pull off the trick that Catherine and David had tried. Mark insisted on this. The sad experience should serve as a lesson to others. They developed a memo on what to do if you suspect a will has been forged, where to apply, how to do examinations. He personally mentioned Layla's story anonymously as an example. Layla's house was filled with children's voices on the weekends. A local orphanage brought children on excursions, and games were held in the yard. Layla loved children, even though she had only one daughter. Mark felt that he would approve of such sounds of life in her house. They drank tea on the veranda again, as in the old days, only now Mark sat with colleagues or guests, sharing ideas for helping. Sometimes he imagined Layla invisibly present, smiling at the sight of her inheritance being used for a good cause. By the end of the year, Layla's foundation had helped dozens of people get their money back or win lawsuits against scammers. The foundation's lawyers helped one elderly couple win back their house from a sly realtor who tried to take it away using a forged power of attorney. Mark was especially proud of this case, seeing parallels with his own story. Mark spoke openly about his past, but without malice. Journalists once asked for an interview. Rumors of an unusual court case had leaked. He said neutrally, without mentioning names, that relatives tried to defraud him of his inheritance, but the law prevailed. When asked if he still communicated with his ex-wife, he answered honestly, "No, that's in the past. I wish for her to improve and live an honest life." At home, Mark set up a small memorial room in Layla's memory. Her portrait hung there, her books were kept there, and her awards for social work were in a display case. Visitors to the foundation would sometimes stop by, and Mark would tell them about the woman who had inspired the whole endeavor. The city authorities noted the initiative. The mayor's office invited Mark to a reception, thanking him for his contribution. He understood that in this way Layla continues to live through good deeds. The house, which had once almost become the scene of a final collapse, was now alive and breathing deeply. The clicking of computer keys, the laughter of children, the ringing of telephones, everything testified. There was no longer room for intrigue and grief here. Here goodness and justice were done. Mark often wondered, what if Layla hadn't taken care of this beforehand? What if he had broken down and given up? Many things could have gone differently, but fortunately, everything had worked out as it should, and now he felt a deep sense of satisfaction seeing the results. There was one last touch left: Layla's letter, which he kept putting off reading until all the work was done. Now that the fund was working, the enemies were punished, the rights were restored, it was time for the final chord. Late in the evening, when the foundation's employees had left, Mark was left alone in the house. He went upstairs to the very bedroom where he had once talked with his mother-in-law about life. He sat in her old chair by the fireplace. On his lap lay an envelope with a note in Layla's hand. "Read when it's all over." Letter and faith. For some reason, these words were associated with Mark. He knew that the letter was certainly about the trust and justice that Layla believed in him. His hands shook as he opened the envelope. Inside were several pages, written in neat handwriting. Mark began to read, and Layla's voice seemed to sound in his head. "Dear Mark, if you are reading this letter, it means that I am no longer here, and most likely difficult events have occurred. I really hope that you have coped with all the trials. First of all, I want to say, I have always believed in your integrity and strength of spirit. When I wrote my will, I knew I was placing a great responsibility on you. Forgive me if it burdened you, but I couldn't do otherwise. You probably know about Richard's affairs now. I am sorry that my choice of a life partner was wrong. Even more sorry if my suspicion of Catherine's infidelity was confirmed. I loved my daughter, but I did not approve of her actions. In recent days, she had become distant, and my heart was heavy. Mark, you became a son to me. I remember our conversations, the help you gave me. That's why I entrusted you with my property. I knew you would use it for good. I want to explain about the moral clause separately. This is my kind of lesson to Catherine and others if they get involved. I believe that good should be rewarded and evil punished. This clause is like a trap for the dishonest. I hope you used it correctly, fairly. If it so happens that Catherine is left with nothing because of her actions, do not rejoice at her fall. Rather, pity and forgive in your soul. I know she hurt you greatly, otherwise you would not be reading this. But try to keep goodness in your heart, do not become embittered. Maybe she'll come to her senses in time. Don't hold a grudge against her. It's important for your own happiness. Now about the future. It was not by chance that I gave so many hints in the folder and the will. I had a dream to help those who get into difficult situations because of lies and dishonesty. I myself wanted to do charity work on this topic after all my affairs. If you can do something similar, I will bless your undertakings from heaven. And finally, about faith. Letter and faith, two tools with which I tried to defend justice. You are reading this letter. And faith, you had it. You believed in me, you believed in the truth, and I hope you believed in yourself. Never lose that faith. Thank you, dear boy, for being there. I'm sorry that it all turned out this way, but I'm sure you'll build a new life, honest and bright, with love and pride for you. Layla. Tears filled Mark's eyes as he finished reading the lines. He didn't hold back, he allowed himself to just cry for the first time in a long time. These were tears of both sadness and relief. Layla foresaw everything, arranged everything, guided him. Her wisdom was amazing. And most importantly, she forgave Catherine in her heart and asked her to forgive him. Mark realized that deep down inside, he no longer held a grudge against his ex-wife. He felt sorry for her, and he hoped she would change. He looked at the portrait of Layla on the wall. It showed her laughing in the garden, holding a flower, as if she were alive. "Thank you, Mama Layla," Mark said quietly. "I tried my best." He imagined her standing next to him, putting her hand on his shoulder as she used to, and nodding approvingly. The starry sky was visible through the window. Mark felt free and renewed. So much was behind him: intrigue, fear, betrayal. But so much had been gained: experience, new friends, a noble cause. The main point of Layla's letter was faith. It was she who helped him endure. Mark remembered standing in the rain at the funeral, lost and crushed. Then the world collapsed. But through faith in truth, in the law, in himself, he was able to go through all the circles of hell and come out with his head held high. He carefully folded the letter, put it back in the envelope, and hid it in the drawer of his desk, where he kept his prized possessions. This letter would be his talisman, a reminder that trust and fairness were not empty words. The next day, Mark sent a short letter to Catherine in prison through her lawyer. Just a few lines that he held no grudge and wished her to find herself. He didn't know if she would answer, but it was important to him to do so for himself and for Layla. That evening, as Mark left the Foundation's home office, he paused at the threshold. The sunset colored the sky. Layla's house was alive, lanterns illuminating the path she had once walked. Mark sensed that she was content. Closing the door, he walked into the living room. Here, agents had once caught criminals, but now everything was quiet. Only the clock was ticking. Mark sank down on the sofa, recalling the entire journey from beginning to end. It seemed incredible how much had happened. But the outcome was bright. He made something constructive out of tragedy. Turning on the desk lamp, Mark took out his diary and wrote, "Today is exactly 1 year since Layla passed away. I fulfilled her request. The foundation works, people receive help. Trust and justice are the main values she gave me. I will continue to follow them." He closed the book, feeling calm. Then he stood up, straightening his shoulders. "Well, Mama Layla, shall we go have some tea?" he whispered, smiling to himself. Picking up a mug from the kitchen table, Mark stepped out onto the porch. The evening air was crisp and scented with the flowers he had planted in memory of Lyle. He sat on the porch, lost in quiet thought. The words from the letter echoed in his head, "Never lose faith." Mark looked up at the stars and said quietly, "I promise." At that moment, a gentle breeze touched his face, like an invisible answer. Mark smiled and took a sip of hot tea, feeling a deep peace. This stage of his life was over. A new one was beginning. Subscribe to our channel so that your love doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think, click to the next one.